Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cinema Heroes. I'm Justin Speck.
I'm Jake Stu.
And today we're talking about Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, released in 1987, directed by Sidney J. Furie, written by Lawrence Connor and Mark Rosenthal from a story by Christopher Reeve, Lawrence Connor and Mark Rosenthal, and starring Christopher Reeve, Gene Hackman, Jackie Cooper, Mark McClure, Margot Kidder, Mariel Hemingway, Mark Pillow, Sam Wanamaker, Jim Broadbent, which was weird. I didn't realize he was in this movie, and good old John Cryer. So yeah, this was the fourth and final Christopher Reeve Superman movie, and it did not do well. I don't remember what the Rotten Tomatoes score is on it, but it's really low. It might be like 10% or something like that. I honestly don't remember, but it killed the Superman franchise for sure, and I think pretty much. I mean, Batman came out 2 years later, but I was going to say it pretty much kind of killed comic book movies too for a little bit. I mean, Batman had to. I think Batman was an uphill battle because of this movie. Yeah, it had to reinvent the wheel, right? So, Stu, this was pretty much, you had seen pieces of this movie, but this was pretty much your first time watching it all the way through, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The only pieces that I had seen were pretty much like bits and pieces of whenever Nuclear Man had showed up.
Right.
But other than that, I hadn't seen much of this movie. Oh, and John Cryer. I saw a few John Cryer scenes when I was a kid, but other than that, I had never watched this movie in its entirety. So today was definitely a first time watch.
Nice.
Oh, it wasn't nice. It wasn't nice.
It's unfortunate that today was your first time watching it because it doesn't hold up, and I can understand why you said this was going to be our shortest episode ever. For me, I didn't own any of the Superman movies on VHS, but I think we either taped this off of TV or it came on TV a lot, or I rented it a lot, because I kind of think this one was the one I had seen the most out of the four.
Yeah, I do remember this one coming on a lot on TV, on like TBS, TNT, Stars.
Yeah.
2 and 4 were on TV all the time. I think the one that was on TV the least was 1.
Yeah, I think when I was a kid, I think 1 was the one I had seen the least. And I probably had seen it all the way through, but once they put out like the box set around 2006 when Superman Returns was coming out, that was when I think I really watched the first one, at least all the way through. It had been a really long time if I had not seen the whole thing, which I probably had, but I remembered it the least as a kid. And this one I feel like I watched the most. I remember there's 3 and 4 are like in my memory the best, I think, as a kid, because I remember Superman fighting himself in Superman 3. And I remember that the lady getting turned into a robot, which scared the crap out of me as a kid. And then I just remember all like the Nuclear Man stuff and the Lenny stuff from this movie. And Mariel Hemingway, I kind of remember her and everything.
Yeah.
So I rewatched this movie years ago, probably over 10 years ago. And I remember kind of enjoying it back then. And I kind of in my brain, I thought this one was better than part 3. And I started to kind of defend it because my big selling point was I was like, they fight on the moon, man. They fight on the moon. It's so cool. Watching it again yesterday. Yeah, not so. I don't feel like I can really defend it anymore. It's short, which is the one nice thing about it. It's only 89 minutes or something, but it doesn't hold up. It does not hold up. So this fourth movie was produced by the Cannon Group. So the Salkinds produced the first 3, and then for whatever reason they sold the film rights to these cousin producers, Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus, who owned the Cannon Group. And they were basically going bankrupt. And I think they were hoping that Superman would help bring them out of bankruptcy. And so the movie was originally supposed to have like a $36 million budget, and it got cut down to $17 million because they were having financial troubles. And so that's part of the reason why, even though this movie came out, 8 years after the original or 9 years after the original or something, the effects are worse than the original movie. And that's partly because their budget got just slashed. Another crazy thing about this movie is it apparently originally was like a 2-hour and 10-minute runtime. And it got poor reviews and screenings, and they chopped it down to 90 minutes, which I'm sure didn't exactly help. I don't know if the 2-hour version would have been any better, but that's what I read in. So I own the soundtrack here, because the reason I pulled this out is because there's a credit that says music by John Williams, adapted and conducted by Alexander Courage. And I was curious if John Williams actually like wrote the score, and then Alexander Courage just, John Williams basically just came up with some new themes. He came up with like Lacey's theme, the Nuclear Man theme, and Jeremy's theme. And then Alexander Courage basically wrote the score, but incorporated those new themes. And the liner notes here says that during more optimistic times, it was the intention of Golan and Globus that Superman 4 legitimately carry the credit, music by John Williams, but the composer was unavailable. Instead, recommending his longtime friend and collaborator, Alexander Courage, while also agreeing to contribute new thematic material. As a result, Superman 4 is the only one of the Superman sequels to feature new John Williams music, even though the score itself is the work of another musician, which I thought was kind of interesting. But anyway, the liner notes in this talked about how the movie got bad reviews at like screenings with the longer runtime, and so that's why they cut it down. Speaking of that, there are some deleted scenes, which I've never actually watched before, but I started to watch before you hopped on. There was originally a first Nuclear Man. There were 2 Nuclear Men in this movie, and the first one was cut out completely. And watching the deleted scenes, I can say that was a good thing, because it is so cartoony and weird. It's like, it just looked so stupid that, I mean, Nuclear Man is kind of a bizarre character anyway, the one that's in the movie. And so to have this other one, it's just weird. He looks almost like something out of the Munsters. Like the makeup is just goofy, and he's got like real spiky hair, and he's like supposed to be kind of dumb. Like when he first gets created, he starts walking towards Lex with his arms outstretched, and he's like, Papa, kind of thing. And it's cartoony and bizarre. So if that was part of the 2-hour cut, then yeah, I can understand why the original screenings got bad reviews. But I will say this movie has no idea what it wants to be. It is all over the place. It's
so
it wants
hard
to be
follow.
Yes. The first few scenes, like we start off in space with him saving the Russians, and I just assumed that was a statement about like the Cold War and how Superman will help everyone. He's like, he'll just help people. Doesn't matter who you are.
That's what I thought the movie was going to be.
Right. Didn't really turn out that way.
No.
Then we jump to Smallville, and Clark is talking to the realtor who's trying to sell his farm, and he tells him that he doesn't want to sell to a big developer who's just going to turn it into a shopping center. He wants to sell to a farmer. And then we never talk about that again. It's just a plot point, if you want to call it that is just dropped. Yep. He doesn't ever go back to Smallville. It's just forgotten about, which I thought was so weird. And then we get into the whole nuclear arms race thing. There's Nuclear Man, but then it's also like it wants to be kind of a rom-com with Superman dating Lois Lane, but Clark Kent dating Lacey, and he's got to go back and forth. That whole scene, doesn't belong in this movie.
No, not at all. That whole thing confused me, because when Lois came over and they went outside for some air, and Clark, she thought Clark was getting ready to off himself. Right. Jumps off the building, right? Jumps off the building. And then Superman shows up I was like, oh, cool. Now she knows.
Right.
Not so much.
Nope.
I was so confused when that wasn't addressed. I'm like, there's no way Lois is that stupid. But apparently she's very stupid. At least in this movie.
In this movie, she is, absolutely.
I'm like that clear he had the glasses on as Superman.
Right. Well, I think she does know. Like, I think she realizes that he's Superman right then. They fly around, but then he does the whole like mind erasing kiss thing with her, which is something he does in Superman 2.
Which I did.
That's the other thing I have a problem with. Actually, a few of these movies.
Yeah,
is that they give Superman these just ridiculous abilities,
ridiculous powers, just for plot convenience.
Just for plot convenience. The whole mind erase kissing thing,
and turning back time.
The way he rebuilds the Great Wall of China in this by just looking at it and
just looking. I was like, what power is that?
Right. So it's just they give him just the weirdest, craziest powers in this movie. And that some of that, I mean, the kiss is in Superman 2 as well. And then in Superman 2, the theatrical version, he's got like the cellophane S that he pulls off his chest. It's just wacky stuff that they throw in this movie for no reason. But yeah, I think in that scene, she realizes that Clark is Superman, but then he kisses her and it wipes her memory. Because then she's like, why am I out here? Oh yeah, you wanted fresh air. So she doesn't remember the whole flying and, at all sequence. But I think it would have been better if that was how he had revealed his secret to her. And then there could have been this whole kind of, I guess you could throw in a comedic element where Lacey's really got a crush on Clark. But now that Lois Lane knows that Clark is Superman, maybe she's like, I don't know, maybe she's being a jerk to Lacey or trying to like,
a little jealous. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that would have been more fun than Clark and Superman having to constantly be like, I'll be right back. And them going, well, where'd Superman go? Where'd Clark go? Because it just really shows how dumb both of those two female characters are by not figuring this out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also, like, it's the stuff in that scene is just so kind of 80s silly movie. Like, this would never happen in real life type of thing. Well, obviously it's a Superman movie, but like he's about to get on the elevator and then a bus, like a bellboy with a luggage carrier, like runs into him and he just rides it out the door. Like the bellboy doesn't stop, even though this grown man is now on his cart. And Clark is
how tall is Christopher Reeve? Is like 6'5", like
right, exactly. Suddenly this carrier has gotten heavier for some reason, and the bellboy's just like, well, I can't stop. I got to keep going. And Clark can't get off. He's like, oh, Lacey. And Lacey's on the elevator watching, and she's like, oh, Clark. It's just the dumbest stuff. So yeah, that a lot of that is just the whole Lacey Lois stuff is just kind of stupid to me.
Unnecessary.
Yeah, it's unnecessary. Then there's the whole plot with Lacey's dad, who plays I forget his name. Warfield. Sam Wanamaker plays David Warfield, who is some millionaire guy who owns all the sleazy tabloids, and now he's just bought the Daily Planet. Or he's become the majority shareholder. I guess.
Yeah.
And so he's basically going to turn the Daily Planet into one of his sleazy tabloids, which is just kind of funny the way they do it in this movie, because like his headlines and stuff, he would just get sued like immediately nowadays. Like he just printing just lies basically. I like how he doesn't. So in the movie, this kid Jeremy, there's this whole thread of like the nuclear. It's not like nuclear war or anything. It's just they're talking about the nuclear arms race, the kind of the end of the Cold War and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And this kid Jeremy in his class is like, we should write to Superman, not to our congressman. We should write to Superman. And so he does. Jeremy writes to Superman and is like, you should get rid of all the nuclear weapons. And Superman is conflicted about it at first, and he doesn't respond to Jeremy. And so Warfield, I guess, gets wind of the fact, because the letter came to the Daily Planet, I guess. It came, I guess he sent it to Lois Lane because maybe he thought Lois would know Superman. And so Warfield gets wind of it and sets up like a press conference with the kid. And the kid's like, I wish he would have said yes. And so they print a headline that says, Superman says, drop dead to kid. Which I was like, that's pretty rough.
It is rough.
And of course, Clark is not very happy about that.
Yeah.
And so he says that he goes to the UN and he says he's going to rid the world of all the nuclear weapons. And I don't know who supplied him with it, but he gets a moon-sized net to put the world's nuclear weapons in.
I was wondering, I'm like, where did he get that net from?
It's gigantic. It's the world's biggest net. The other thing that is weird to me is he says he's going to rid the world of all the nuclear weapons. And so then everybody just starts launching the nuclear weapons because that's how he gets them. They start launching and he grabs them and then throws them into space. So it was like, were all the countries in the world
was the point?
Right. I just imagine all the countries going, well, he's going to take them. We should set him off now, I guess. I mean, like, we've got him now. Let's use him.
Right.
Like, it was weird. But that's how Lex creates Nuclear Man, though. So he steals a strand of hair that was like donated to a museum. And I always thought that was kind of cool as a kid, that the hair was holding up 1,000-pound weight. Lex comes and steals the hair and creates this genetic material from the hair and puts that in a nuclear missile because he knows that Superman is going to throw the missile into the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're launching the missile, because since Superman's going to take them, they're just launching them. They're just launching them left and right now. So Lex puts the genetic material in the missile. The plan goes exactly how Lex assumes it's going to go. Superman stops the missile, throws it into the sun. And because of that, the nuclear reaction, I guess, with the sun and the genetic material creates Nuclear Man in full costume. That was also a great little, he's like cutting the fabric and Lenny's like, we're going to need more than that. And Lex is like, the computer will create everything that we need, which I thought was a great little technobabble, like answer to that plot hole that everybody, I guess, was going to be wondering.
Right.
And so Nuclear Man is born, played by Mark Pillow, voiced by Gene Hackman, which was kind of interesting. Nuclear Man. So I like that the movie gives Superman a villain that he can fight. That's not Zod, because we had Zod in the second movie. And the only villain he really could fight in the last movie was himself. And I guess maybe the computer woman. So it was kind of cool getting a superpowered being that Superman could fight. And I read that originally Christopher Reeve was going to play Nuclear Man, and it was going to be kind of a play off of Bizarro.
Yeah.
Which I think would have been better.
I agree.
Because even though I like that they got like a superpowered villain for Superman to fight, Nuclear Man is a original creation, and they've got so many characters that they could have chosen from the comics. I don't know why they decided to just come up with a new one called Nuclear Man that's not even, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about Nuclear Man?
I mean, I don't even know what to say.
Right.
I can't say that I don't like him. He doesn't do anything for me to not like. I mean, I do like I like the end, the fight on the moon.
Yeah.
That was cool. I gotta admit.
It's the best part of the movie.
Yeah. Best part of the movie. But he just doesn't do much of anything throughout the rest of the movie. I don't know why they chose to make Gene Hackman his voice.
Right. It makes no sense.
It makes no sense at all.
Because there's no genetic material of Lex's in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and I don't know if it was, I mean, they flat out say in the movie, you've got my voice. So it was obviously kind of written into it. At first I thought maybe Mark Pillow didn't give like a good performance, or maybe they didn't like his voice, so they decided to dub over it. But it was Gene Hackman's character has a line about "you've got my voice," so it didn't make any sense there. like I said, I think I like Nuclear Man for the reasons I said, that, you know, Superman has a super villain or a superpowered villain to fight, but he's so two-dimensional. He's so just paper thin. Like, all he does is he shows up and he's like, destroy Superman. And that's like all it is. And then his whole like weakness where he gets out of the sunlight and immediately like powers down.
Yeah.
It's just like ridiculous. And I don't know. I mean, I assume in the comics by this point, you know, I don't know if it was one of the things that was originally written about Superman. I don't think so, because he wasn't even like flying when Superman was created.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it is kind of well known now that Superman gets his powers from our sun. The yellow sun with his Kryptonian makeup is what gives him his powers.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that was kind of common knowledge or if that was the case at this point. I feel like it was. In 1987, I feel like it was. So it was interesting that they came up with a villain who gets his powers from the sunlight, but like doesn't store any of that. And so that when he is out of the sun, he is just, he's off. He's just turned off.
He's in standby mode.
Yeah, exactly. And I like how they actually how they show that, how he follows Lex and immediately like, crouches down, and Lex shines just a little bit of sunlight from his ring on him, and he stands up. And then as soon as Lex walks away, he's like, ugh, and finally goes back down. I was like, well, this guy should be somewhat easy to beat. Just turn the lights off. But but he ends up being I guess a formidable foe. He scratches Superman. That's really what happens. And I guess, okay, we got to back up. Let's go all the way back to the beginning of the movie where he goes to Smallville. There is a crystal that he has kept at the Smallville farm that I guess was in his ship when he arrived on Earth.
That's what I
And there's
assumed.
some voiceover from his mom that basically says, this is the last remaining like energy from Krypton.
Mm-hmm.
This always confused me as a kid, not because it was like the last remaining, the fact that it's glowing green. Yeah. Why did they do that? As a kid, I thought it was kryptonite, and I never understood why it wasn't affecting him.
Right.
And so I was like, you could have chosen any color. Why did you make it glowing green? I realize it's a crystal. It doesn't look like a meteor, but as a child, I was like, he's holding kryptonite. What is, I was so confused as a kid.
I said the same. I thought the same thing, but I made sense of it in my head, saying that, well, clearly, even though it's green and looks like kryptonite, it's not radioactive, so it's not kryptonite.
Right. And as an adult, I guess you can kind of do that. But as a kid, you've seen 3 movies where this glowing green rock is hurt Superman, and all of a sudden in this 4th one, he's got a glowing green crystal that doesn't hurt him.
Yeah.
And so that is the only way that he's able to recuperate after getting scratched by Nuclear Man. He basically like starts aging rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
He tells Lois he's got the flu. That was another scene where they really make it seem like Lois knows who he is, because she comes to visit him and drops off the cape.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of is almost, it feels like it's like, she knows that Clark is Superman, but I don't know if she actually
And then
does.
she starts telling them, well, like, if he was here, I would say this, this, and this. Like,
yeah, exactly. Again, I don't think the movie would be any better by the longer cut, but I kind of almost wish I could see the longer cut to see if some of these things were fleshed out a little more or not. Probably not, but I don't know. As a kid, I even thought she knew who he was because she brings him the cape.
Mm-hmm.
But he basically tells her, he's like, I got the flu. And then he goes and gets the crystal again. And that is what revives him, I guess. The energy from Krypton heals him somehow.
I want to go back to what you said about this movie not knowing what it is. That's the thing that bothered me the most about the movie. I had the expectation that this was going to be a social commentary on nuclear war, and they only did that for like maybe the first 20 minutes of the movie.
Right.
And then the rest of the movie is a nonsensical rom-com, like you said. And
then there's a fight with Nuclear Man. Right.
Yeah, and then there's a fight with Nuclear Man. I kind of wish it was that social commentary on nuclear war. That 20 minutes should have been the entire movie. And when they wrapped it up so quickly, I was like, well, what could the rest of this movie possibly be? And then it doesn't even feel like a Superman movie from that point on.
No, I agree. And then at the end, after he's defeated Nuclear Man, he comes and like gives another press conference, and he basically says, I tried to rid the world of all nuclear weapons to bring about peace, but really I can't do it. You the people have to demand peace of your governments. Mm-hmm. And so what was the point? It was like, it just
right.
It was, I do think, Christopher Reeve has a story credit, and I believe the nuclear arms stuff was Christopher Reeve's idea. And I don't know where it got chopped up and changed, or maybe that was his whole idea. Just Superman rids the world of nuclear weapons. And that was all that was the only thing he contributed. I have no idea. But yeah, this movie just is a mess from start to finish, basically.
Yeah.
And it has such a low budget. I'm amazed that Gene Hackman came back. Because he left. If you watch the theatrical cut of Superman 2, he's in like half that movie. Because once Richard Donner got fired, he left. And they had to bring in like a stand-in to play Lex. And it's so obvious that it's somebody else because they never show his face. And the couple of times where like they have to have him talk, it's some other actor kind of doing a Gene Hackman impression. And he's like, hey, what are you? And like the shot from behind, and it's just like, it's so obvious it's not Gene Hackman. And so then he's not in Superman 3. They must have thrown him a bunch of money. Like out of the $17 million budget.
He probably got about 15 of that.
Right, yeah, exactly. Christopher Reeve, I think, got 6. And, I wouldn't be surprised if Gene Hackman got the same, about the same.
He had to have gotten 6.
Yeah, and so then there's only... $5 million for the rest of the movie.
$5 million left, yeah.
Which makes sense when you see some of these scenes, like the fight at the Statue of Liberty when they land. Like you could just tell they built like a corner that's supposed to be the base of the Statue of Liberty. It's on some soundstage. It looks like cardboard. It's just the production value of this movie is not great.
No.
But I do like that Gene Hackman is in it. I like his Lex Luthor. Christopher Reeve is the only real saving grace of the movie just because he's great as Superman and he's great as Clark Kent, even though the material is not good. I remember liking in the very beginning of the movie when he's in the barn getting that green crystal, he is in Superman mode. And then when he sees the realtor drive up, he comes out, and just the way he walks and carries his body, he's gone into Clark Kent mode. Yeah. And it just is amazing to me. It still amazes me just how good he is at how well he just physically manifested the identity switch, and so, and he gets goofy, like when he's working out with Lacey, and it's like he's just being, stupid Clark Kent at that point. But it's just, I will forever be a fan of how Christopher Reeve portrayed Clark Kent and how he portrayed Superman.
How would you like to see Clark Kent portrayed in the future?
I'm torn on this because I do think the best way to do it is the way Christopher Reeve does it. I think the best way to do it is have not in this movie, not the way it's cartoony, but have Clark be I almost kind of want Clark to be the type of person who not so like annoying that you like can't stand the person, but just like forgettable. I think that's the whole idea. Is like, I think he wants Clark to be this person that you just kind of don't even realize is there. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, I forgot you were there, Clark. That type of thing. And I think that really works in terms of the whole secret identity idea. However, I also really, even though it makes it so much more unbelievable that the people around him don't know that he's Superman, I like the Henry Cavill version of Clark, who is basically just Superman with glasses, you know. I think that works too. That's how Tyler Hecklin plays him on Superman and Lois. He's just, you know, he's just Superman with glasses.
Yeah, I was gonna say that Henry Cavill and Tyler Hecklin. Tyler Hecklin is a great Superman, by the way. I don't think people talk about him enough as Superman. He's fantastic. But both of them, they're Superman all the time.
Right.
The only thing that changes is their clothes.
And it does become like really hard to believe that nobody knows who he is, because he's the exact same person. Yeah.
The only thing about I agree with that with Tyler Hecklin, but with Henry Cavill, I think the thing that sets him apart from Superman, other than his clothes, is the fact that Clark Kent doesn't talk a whole lot. He kind of is. He's very observant, and he sits and waits and listens before he says something. So I could see his Clark Kent being kind of forgettable, even though his Clark Kent carries himself with so much confidence. It's like, this guy is clearly Superman. But
right.
Because his Clark Kent is soft-spoken, well, not soft-spoken, but he doesn't talk much and just kind of sits in the corner, I could see people, you know, being that, believing that he's that kind of Clark Kent that you said, just kind of forgetting that he's there.
Right.
Because he doesn't make his presence known until he talks.
Fades into the background a bit.
Yeah, he fades into the background. Personally, I would like to see a socially awkward Clark Kent, not the bumbling fool that Christopher Reeve is, but someone who doesn't quite, I don't want to say gets along with people, but like someone who doesn't pick up on social cues, that type of person.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would like to see that too. I don't know if that's how. I'm curious to see how James Gunn will have his version of Clark Kent. But yeah, I think it just works the best. I think it really does work well, especially when there's that physical change. The way that
he slumps over and
kind of slumps over, and you know, and then
like he kind of caves his chest in when he's Clark Kent.
Right. And it's amazing. The fact that he did that, because I think he was the first actor to really ever do that. There was, I know in the Superman radio shows, the actor who played Superman he kind of did a higher voice for Clark, and then this is a job for Superman. You know, he kind of went lower to be Superman. So he had the change in voice, but I don't think any of the live action actors, which I guess there were only two before Christopher Reeve, I don't think they did that, because George Reeves, he was basically the same. He was Superman. Clark Kent and Superman were the same guy, just with different clothes on, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, even in the comics, if it was a thing until Christopher Reeve came around. I don't really know.
Mean, that's kind of how I feel about Batman all the way up until, as far as live action Batman, it's all the way up until Christian Bale, because there's not that much difference in Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne and Batman other than the voice.
Right.
Like he's the same person. He just changes the way he talks.
Right. And you're absolutely right. And I don't think it was kind of done on the animated series.
Yes.
Not to the extent that's
why I had to specify live action.
Yeah. Which Kevin Conroy, I will attribute, that was, I think, Kevin Conroy's idea to do that difference. But he's even on the animated series, he's not as different as Christian Bale or Christopher Nolan made Bruce. Like, the whole idea to have him basically have Bruce Wayne just be like this party guy who buys hotels because the ladies he's with are in the water, you know. Yeah. That whole, like, to have that be his public persona, so that way nobody would think that this guy is Batman.
Yeah, that was popularized with Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, I agree. Another scene that I think is just silly, in this movie is also in the beginning. And it was just, it just was a scene where they wanted to have Superman save the day again. And it's Lois gets on the subway, and the subway, like, engineer, conductor, whatever they're called, the driver, has like a heart attack, slumps over, and the train starts going fast. And Lois just starts screaming help to all the other passengers that are on the train. And I realized maybe she's thinking Superman will hear me if I just start screaming help. But it's just, watching it, I was like, why are you just screaming help to all the...
I'm glad you brought that up, because that is something that a lot of Superman traditionalists want, and that's one of the complaints that they had with Zack Snyder's version of Superman, is that he didn't save enough people. And I don't want him doing things like that, saving for the sake of saving, and it doesn't propel the story. I don't want that. If it's not helping the story, don't do it. I don't want to see Superman saving cats out of trees. I don't want him to save Lois from a speeding subway just for the sake of it, just because that's what Superman is supposed to do. That's the problem that I have with traditionalists. They are so bound to tradition that when someone does something different and does it different for the sake of the story, they can't handle it.
Right. And also, I guess you could just never please everyone when it comes to Superman movies, because Superman Returns, which we will talk about soon, he does pretty much nothing but save people in that movie. And everybody complained that he didn't fight anybody. So then Man of Steel comes out, and it's got this whole big fight scene between him and Zod, and now everybody's complaining that he doesn't save anybody. So it's just like, you can't please them. You can't please them.
You can't please them. You can't. And both of those movies, it takes a decade to go by before people appreciate the movie.
Right. It's true.
People didn't start appreciating Superman Returns until Man of Steel came out. And now people, it wasn't until Zack Snyder's Justice League came out that people started to appreciate Man of Steel. I'm like, why don't you just appreciate it when it's out? It's the same movie. It didn't change.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's one thing that I really dislike about the superhero community, is that, I mean, don't get me wrong, my opinions change on movies a lot, but people are so polarizing when it comes to superhero movies. They did the same thing with Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man 2. When No Way Home came out, like, all these people came out of nowhere talking about how they loved Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. I'm like, some of you are lying. like where were you when these movies came out?
Yeah.
I've always loved Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. Garfield said that. Yeah, like I've always loved Andrew Garfield. So his Spider-Man movies aren't the best movies, but I love his Spider-Man, and I personally, I think The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a decent movie. It's not perfect, but it's not the trash heap that people were calling it. But again, like I said, people are like, people just came out of nowhere saying, "Oh, I love this movie." Like, no, you didn't.
Right? Stop no, you didn't. Yeah, I agree. I remember. So when we talked about Amazing Spider-Man 2, it was just John and I believe. And when I rewatched that movie, I rewatched it because I had not seen it since I saw it in the theater. And I probably didn't like it in my brain that it was a bad movie. Yeah. And I don't remember like walking out of the theater hating it. I do remember walking out of the theater hating the fact that they showed the final shot in the trailer. That really just made me mad. But I don't remember hating it, but I also didn't think it was great. Rewatching it for the podcast, John did not like it, but I found myself really enjoying most of that movie.
Yes.
And so I agree. I think that movie, well, and I never disliked Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man or Peter Parker. They don't make him, Peter Parker is kind of traditionally supposed to be a nerd, and Andrew Garfield kind of made him cool, which is not, I don't have a problem with that. I think it still works. And I think Andrew, and you and I have both talked about Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone's chemistry is the best out of any of the Spider-Man.
Any superhero movie ever. Right. Like, it's so, their chemistry is so thick. And to go back to what you said about his Peter Parker, for people that read comics, I know there are a lot of people that watch comic book movies that don't read comics, and that's fine. But for the people that actually read the comics, his version of Peter Parker is the ultimate version of Peter Parker. The ultimate version of Peter Parker was a nerd, but he was kind of a and that he was not. I don't want to say likable, but for lack of a better term, he wasn't as likable, but you had a lot of sympathy for him because he still retained a lot of that classic Peter Parker as far as, you know, the unrequited love and all the stuff that he's going through at home. It brought it to a more modernized version of Peter Parker and how someone would react to all of those situations in today's world, in the 21st century. If you have all of those problems, of course you're probably going to be pretty grumpy. And his Peter Parker was kind of grumpy, which I liked. I could relate to that. That movie came out when I was in my Peter Parker stage, when I was a young man struggling to pay the rent and stuff like that. So I could relate to that. That's why he's my favorite Spider-Man, because he played a version of Peter Parker that was me.
You could relate to. Yeah. That's cool. And I totally respect that. I think that works really well. And like I said, I didn't have a problem with it. It just was different than the traditional Peter Parker, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
but I didn't. I guess I didn't. I don't know if I read any Ultimate. I know I read some Ultimate X-Men, but I don't know if I ever read any Ultimate Spider-Man. So
I read Ultimate Spider-Man, a little bit of Ultimate X-Men, a little bit of Ultimate Fantastic Four, and the Ultimate. So I read a little, like a pretty good chunk of it.
Little Ultimates too, yeah.
Yeah.
And I may have read some Ultimate. I think I wanted to read Ultimate Spider-Man, but I think I missed like the first few issues, and I think I was, because I was buying comics back then when the Ultimates kind of came out, or maybe I just missed the beginning of it. I don't remember, but I think I had trouble finding the first few issues of the Ultimate Spider-Man run. And I guess I could have just bought like the trade paperback, but I don't know.
I used to just go to the library and check them out and then take them back.
That's such a good idea. I always forget about. I get some digital comics through like the library, but I never think about actually going to the library and checking out comics. I should do that. Anyway, back to Superman 4 real quick. There's a couple more things I want to talk about with this movie, especially concerning the third act. So we've talked about the moon fight. The moon fight is the best part of the movie. I like the actual fight scene on the moon. I think that I can say, I enjoy. But then we just go off the wall nuts because Superman pushes the moon so that he basically creates an eclipse. But I was like, he starts pushing the moon, and I'm like, what is he doing? Like, it's just like
that. I just imagine would absolutely send the planet into chaos.
Exactly. I wanted it to cut down to Earth, and like the oceans are just like causing tsunamis. It would be
tsunamis everywhere. Tsunamis and earthquakes.
Right. And to top it off, Nuclear Man, I guess, sees a picture of Lacey in the Daily Planet and then suddenly becomes obsessed with her. And he flies her out into space, and she's okay. She's fine, actually. And Superman creates the eclipse, and which causes Nuclear Man to power off. And Superman gets Lacey and flies. And like, at first I was like, well, maybe they're just like high in the atmosphere, which would still be ridiculous. But then when
she still wouldn't be able to, she would pass out.
She would be dead. Yeah. But when Superman catches her after Nuclear Man drops her, which she falls in space, which is kind of funny. Also, their capes are flapping in space too, which I realized it was the 80s, but still. he catches her and starts flying her back towards Earth, and Earth is far away. So I was like, no, she's out there in space, and survives re-entry. Yeah, so it's just like,
without burning up.
Right. It's amazing how just ridiculous this movie gets at the very end. So yeah, this movie just takes all logic and throws it out the window.
Yeah.
Richard Donner, when he was directing the first Superman movie, his big like slogan during shooting was geez Louise, I can get the word out, I promise. Verisimilitude, right? Is that right? Or did I get that? Did I butcher that?
Verisimilitude? What?
You can't do it either. Verisimilitude.
Verisimilitude.
I knew I was going to mess it up. Which basically means the appearance of being true or real. He wanted it to, he was not interested in making like a cartoon. He wanted it to feel real. Everybody in the movie needed to act like this was real. He wanted it to feel true. And that, I think, is the main reason it was so successful. I think the fact that they took it seriously and made it as if this could actually be in our world and whatnot. And the producers / director / writers of this movie said, no, screw that. No. We're going to make a cartoon.
Yeah. Yeah. Richard Donner, the way he made his Superman movies, he changed the genre henceforth. Like every superhero movie after that references referencing Superman and Superman 2. Yeah. Because of whatever word, verisimilitude.
yeah, that.
And I love him for it. I don't have the emotional attachment to the Superman movies as you do and as a lot of the older generation does, but I do have tremendous respect for Richard Donner for saying, hey, we're not making a superhero movie. We're going to make a movie where the main character is a superhero. We're just going to tell it. We're just going to tell a good story. And the main guy just happens to have superpowers. That is how superhero movies should be made. And when they're not made that way, it sticks out like a sore thumb. You can tell when movies are not made that way.
And this one was not made that way.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about, which I don't know if we really need to, but we haven't even talked about Lenny, played by John Cryer, who is Lex Luthor's nephew, who I don't really know why they include him in this. He helps him break out of prison, but other than that, I guess he's supposed to be comedic relief, but he's not really that funny. He's just kind of the bumbling idiot sidekick. He's the Otis, I guess, of this movie, but for a younger generation, I guess, because it's John Cryer, who I think was kind of probably around the peak of his fame at this point. He had done like Pretty in Pink and became pretty famous and stuff, but he's just the stupid sidekick, like, what is he? Oh no. Like that's what he says throughout the movie, Oh no, Uncle Lex. Yeah. I even as a kid, I didn't really like Lenny very much.
Nah.
So it doesn't really bring anything. I like how Superman flies him to the boys' home at the end of the movie. And I'm like, this guy's like 28 years old. Like clearly, I guess they were saying he's supposed to be younger than that since he gets dropped off at the boys' home and goes willingly. Right. Like the priest or whatever at the boys' home is like, every boy deserves a chance at redemption or something like that. And Lenny's just like, all right, whatever, I'll go with you. And then Superman takes Lex to back to the chain gang prison yard or whatever, breaking rocks. So Superman wins at the end of the movie. I think that covers all the crazy plot points I wanted to bring up. Music, I think the music's pretty decent for the time. Alexander Courage is actually the guy that wrote the original Star Trek theme for the original series.
Oh,
he did some of the music for there were a few composers for that show, but Alexander Courage is the one that actually wrote the actual theme. So that it's kind of neat that he does this movie too. And I like, obviously the Superman theme that John Williams created is amazing. And I like the Nuclear Man theme.
I don't even
but some of this music is a little dated. It's a little 80s, a little, But for the most part, I think the music's pretty decent. But yeah, the effects are pretty bad, and everything else about it is pretty bad. Christopher Reeve and the music and Gene Hackman are probably the only good things about the movie. And the fight on the moon.
Yeah.
With that being said, I'll give you my rating. I think I was actually originally going to go a tiny bit higher until we started really talking about it. And I don't really think there's anything. The very few things I like about this movie are not enough to warrant an extra star or half a star or anything. So for me, I'm going to go 1.5 nuclear mans for this one.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna go.
And I'll be honest, that half star might be nostalgia.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go 1. Like, it's not.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. The 1 is not because the movie is like horrendous, because there are like atrocities of movies that are made. This is a 1 because it's hard to follow. It's so nonsensical, and it doesn't, like we said, it doesn't know what kind of movie it wants to be.
Right.
So yeah, I'm gonna give it a 1. I'm tempted to give it a 1.5, but I think I'm gonna stick with 1.
That's kind of what I was expecting. Was a 1 from you. Not Superman. Christopher Reeve apparently in his memoir said, and it was the only time he mentioned Superman 4, said, the less said about Superman 4, the better. So he was apparently not, from what I read, he clashed with the director a lot, and it was just not a good experience from start to finish, basically, for him. Mm-hmm. He apparently only agreed to do it so that the studio would fund a movie that he really wanted to make, which apparently also flopped. So it was just not a good experience for him, and he apparently even kind of refused to talk about it in interviews and stuff. He just did not like this movie or have a good time making it.
That sucks.
So, yeah. And it's just a bummer. Christopher Reeve is such a good Superman. It's a bummer that this is the final outing, but, obviously it had to end at some point, and this movie definitely put a nail in the coffin.
Yeah. For 20 years.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Yeah, they could not make another Superman movie. They tried with Nicolas Cage and Tim Burton, but they could not make another Superman movie for almost 20 years. It was 19 years later.
19 years.
Superman Returns came out. Yep. Alrighty, well, we'd love to know what you think about Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. You can always let us know at cinemaheroes.com. You can post on our Instagram, or comment on our Instagram posts, I should say, at Cinema Heroes, or you can leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube down below. Give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But I think that about wraps up for this episode. I'm Justin Speck.
I'm Jay Stu.
As always, thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing.